I get it back in place. Good morning, everybody. Wherever you may be this beautiful Sunday morning. And I invite you, if you have your Bibles and want to be looking along, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 20 this morning. But again, we've been following, of course, Moses and the Hebrew people. They've escaped a life of slavery. They find themselves on the edge of the desert. Their enemies are gone, even though they've already had a battle or two. And they're at the beginning of their journey to the promised land. All they've ever known is a life of slavery to sin. And now they're on the edge. And if somebody came to you and they said, "Wait, didn't I see you going in that Salem church over there the other day? Or do you believe in Jesus or something?" And somebody said, I want to be a person of faith. I want to follow Jesus, but I don't really know what it is. I've been living a life of sin, but now I want to go in the right direction. Could you guide me in that? What advice would you have for me? Do you have any suggestions on how now that I'm not living a life of sin, but I don't know what to do now, what suggestions would you have for me? Who would feel real good about helping somebody with a question like that? This is where the people were. They knew how to be slaves. They did not know how to follow God. And so it gets them together, and we talked about how they gather. They don't really understand what it's like to be in the presence of God. And there he is. He comes down. He's on Mount Sinai. And he says, "Let me talk to Moses, but nobody else, because you're not ready yet to be in the presence of God." And of course, Moses goes up, and Moses and God basically says, "Okay, let's get this journey started." And he starts out by giving them the what? Gives them the 10 Commandments. If you ever want to help somebody get started, the 10 Commandments is a real good place to start. And we went through those quickly, I think it was last week. But the thing I like to remind people is that Jesus takes the 10 Commandments and he boils them down for simple minds like mine into how many? 2. And the 2 commandments that Jesus reminds us are, first of all, love God with all of your heart, your soul, your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus is very clear. If you really focus on your relationship with God, you focus on your relationship with your neighbors and your friends, you're doing it. To me, that's the shorthand approach. If you're going to follow Jesus day in and day out, you're always thinking, where am I with God right now? Are we friends? Do I still see God as an enemy? Where am I with God? Where am I with my friends, my family, my coworkers, my whatever it might be? And of course, Jesus helps us define my neighbor by including our enemies. I'm supposed to love my enemies just as much as I love myself. I would have been okay if Jesus left that part out. But he emphasizes that. That's what makes the people of God different. So he gives them the 10 Commandments. And now in Exodus chapter 20, what is the first thing that he does? These are going to get you started. But in Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 22, the Lord said to Moses, "You shall say to the Israelites, you have seen for yourselves that I spoke with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver alongside me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold." Why does he have to tell them that? Because at this point they do not believe in one God. They believe in a lot of gods. Everywhere you look, there's a different God. which we need to remind ourselves, because do we believe in one God? We say we do, but when I start putting my hope in other people, institutions, or whatever, I'm in danger of replacing God with them. He says, you need make for me only an altar of earth, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your offerings of well-being, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. But if you make for me an altar of stone, do not build it out of hewn or carved stones. For if you use a chisel on it, you profane it. The first thing he does, okay, now these are the rules that are going to get you started, but now let's talk about, what is this? Right here. What's this? Okay, but the communion is on the altar. This is what we call an altar, right? What is an altar? Why do we have an altar? Now, for countless ages, the altar is where you would do what? We do what? You're always, people would come to the altar to pray, because you'd come to the altar to pray, because when you come to the altar, you expect to be in the presence of God. This symbolizes God's presence. What do we put on the altar? What did they put on the altar? He just mentioned it. Whatever you give to God. For primarily, they would bring their offerings. The offerings would be sacrificed, burnt, placed on the altar. This was God's special place. If you really were deliberate about talking with God, being with God, you would go to the altar to do that. That's why, where do we put the offering? We put it on the altar, because this is God's place. The communion, the gift of God to us, what else do we put on the altar? Have you ever bothered to think about what is on here? I'll say behind the people that can't see me now. We put things that people can read for inspiration. This is a God thing. We want this to be a blessing to people. We're hoping that God is going to speak through that. And I didn't really think about it until this morning, but we've got our new, they can see it wherever they are, but our new directory. I like the fact that it's right here on the altar. So symbolically, we offer our entire fellowship as a gift to God. This is God's special place. Okay, so why do we do that? Where is God? Where? God is everywhere. But we do this to help us out. When I'm out in the world and it's confusing and it's scary and I can't make sense out of it, I need some help recognizing that wherever I am, I'm in the presence of God. And so I come here to do that. Now, interestingly, so he says, okay, let's create a space, since you're going to begin this journey with me, where you can really focus on being with me. So we make an altar. And did you catch the instructions for this altar? What did he say to do? So what do? You go out and you pick up rocks. And what do you do to those rocks? Nothing. Do not change those rocks in any way. Who made those rocks the way they are? Right? And so you bring the rocks, you pile them up, and that is your altar. Now their thought was, we've seen altars all over the world, and they cut the most beautiful marble stones. They're shiny, they're impressive, and you just can't help but be awed by how beautiful their altars are. And God says, I don't play that game. What happens? If you start cutting up these stones into beautiful the rocks into beautiful square stones, and you put them together really nicely. People are going to come to my altar to meet me. They're going to look at it and they're going to think, what? Ooh, there's some really nice people work going into that altar. Isn't it impressive what people are able to? Oh, that's right, I'm here to meet God. And so we take the very place where we're supposed to commune with God and we turn it into a demonstration of what people are able to do. He said, no, I want rocks that have never been touched by people other than to pile them up and do that. This is them getting started. And so I would ask you, where is your personal altar? The times in your life when you really need to be with God, where do you go? I hope that this would be a good place to go to. But for you personally, do you have your own personal altar? There have been times in my life where I had a place to go where I could be by myself with God. There have been a few times in my life where everything else that was going on, it seemed around me, I just wanted to leave it all. And I couldn't focus on God, but I would find a peaceful place. Interestingly, research on when you ask people to imagine the most beautiful, peaceful place, people almost always include what? What's that? Well, I mean, you think about, in a sense, you're kind of describing heaven, but in an earthly place, if you create the most beautiful, inspiring, peaceful place, it almost always includes, not so much, but includes water. People, if they've been invited, just imagine the most beautiful place, and they'll imagine a lake. They'll imagine the sea, a pond, a stream. There is something about water. I think this is partly why Jesus uses the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee so much, is that there's something about God that we pick up when we do this. But where is your altar? Where is your place where you can be alone with God? And if you've never deliberately done that, I would invite you to do that and find a special place where you can have your altar. And this is something they've never done. They're going to learn how to do this. The very next thing, if that's lesson number 1, lesson number 2, this is chapter 21 of Exodus, verse 1. These are the ordinances that you shall set before them. When you buy a male Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. And then he goes on to talk about the rules and regulations for having a slave. Now, does anybody see any irony here? What did they just get away from? They were slaves themselves, an entire nation of slaves. And now, after we have the altar, the first lesson is, okay, now let me talk to you about your slaves. And how, if you're going to be a godly person, this is how you're going to treat your slaves. Doesn't that seem kind of odd? This is like the first lesson on behavior deals with slaves. Whenever you see the term slaves, you think of what people in any society? The people that are at highest risk for being oppressed, for people taking advantage of them. They are in more danger. They need help. And so if you're going to be godly people, you are going to treat your slaves differently than the rest of the world does. Now, I've always had problems with this because I guarantee you, if you go back to the 1700s, the 1800s in this country, this passage was used to support the practice of slavery. It's in the Bible, right? And of course, we ended up fighting a war over this. So how does God talk to them about slavery when I feel like I don't want to believe in slavery? I remember the day this was explained to me, when God says this is actually an example of God's grace. God comes to these people and they are living the life of Bedouins out in the desert. Okay? They're living in a world whose economy is based on slavery. And if God showed up and he said, guess what? From now on there are going to be no slaves, they would have no idea how to replace that, what to do. He accepts them where they're at. If God came into your life and mine, he said, I demand perfection, just like Jesus, and nothing else but perfection, who of us would be here next week? There's no way. But did it ever occur to you that one of the truest signs of the grace of God, that even in my sinful life, he works with me where I'm at? And you follow this thinking through the Bible and you see it beginning to change, especially when we get to the New Testament. Maybe we'll do that another time. But God says, I recognize that this is where you're at. But I want you to know, if you're going to have slaves, you will not treat them the way the rest of the world does. They will recognize you as a godly person by the way you treat the most vulnerable people in your life. And so we're looking for those people. He meets them where they are. The third thing that I'm going to mention here, the very next lesson, obviously to me interesting, the very first one deals with slaves. The next one is in verse 12. Whoever strikes a person mortally shall be put to death. If it was not premeditated, but come about by an act of God, then I will appoint for you a place to which the killer may flee. But if someone willfully attacks and kills another by treachery, you shall take the killer from my altar for execution. Okay, and he goes on, this section, dealing with violence. The very first thing he does after I need a place for you and I to meet and talk about things. If you're going to follow me, you're going to be focusing on the slaves, the most vulnerable people that are in your life. Okay, you understand that focus? Now let's talk about violence. Could it be that one of the most recognized examples of human sin is our violence towards one another? And so he goes on to talk about, if somebody does this act of violence, this is how you deal with it. Somebody does this act of violence, then you do this. This is what I'm asking you to do when you see and experience violence. Okay, now I'm going to start out by saying that the ability to be violent is a gift from God. Anybody ever say that to you? The ability to be violent is essentially a gift from God. Because what does the ability to be violent enable you to do? It enables you to protect the ones that are most vulnerable. Okay? If I'm at home and I've got my little ones with me, and you come into my home to do them harm, what do you think I'm going to do to protect my little ones? You're going to see violence that you never realized existed. Because God has given me the responsibility, the stewardship over these little ones to protect them. Okay? Now so I tend to see violence. Violence is a tool that you have to be very careful in the hopefully isolated times when you will ever have to use it. And so he recognizes this, that I have made you with the ability to be violent, because there's going to be times when if you're going to follow my will, you're going to be a violent person. But you will always be in control. I don't know about you, but if you ever see me getting violent, Dwayne's lost it. And we don't know what's going to come next. But a true person of God has the ability to be violent in order to accomplish a greater good. And they're in control of that violence from beginning to end. So that'll help put that into context. It turns out that in this section here in chapter 21 is a very famous verse 23. Again, God has been talking to Moses about different ways that people get violent towards one another. And in verse 23, if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Okay, he's very clearly saying, if somebody does you harm, what would a godly person expect as a response? The same thing. Okay, now maybe this is just me, but I'll share a little bit. When somebody does something really wrong towards me, my thought is, I want to do the same thing back to them in return. Plus what? I just want to add a lesson to this. I want to add a little bit more to get the point across that was inappropriate. You know, and the research is really solid on this. When somebody does you harm, what do you want them to experience? We want them to feel the same thing that I felt when you did me harm. At the very least. And then I want to add a little bit of a lesson on that to get the point across so you don't ever forget never to do that to me again. Now the problem is if we do that, that person thinks what? That wasn't fair. Now I have to teach you a lesson. And now I've got to teach you another lesson. And then all of a sudden, you're either the Hatfields or you're the McCoys, right? And what you end up with is an endless feud. And it goes on, generation after generation. Finally, they go, why are we at war? Why are we feuding? And you look at each other and go, I honestly don't remember how this got started. But our general rule of thumb is whatever you do to me, I'm going to do a little bit more to you. And so we end up in world history can essentially be written by unending feuds. And so it sounds, in a modern eye, this sounds cruel. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? I remember hearing that as a child. But God's goal here is to end this endless feuding. Let's try to bring a rational mind to our conflicts so that we don't end up harming people generation after generation. And that's what a godly person is going to do. Not just think about, I know what you did to me and I'm going to get even about it, but I'm also thinking about your loved ones. I'm thinking about my loved ones and how do we keep pulling them into this messed up life. So it may be a little confusing, but if you look at this, I really think God is trying to develop a mindset. He wants us to be spiritually aware, to see the world in a spiritual way, to wake up and to see things spiritually. An interesting thing happened to me yesterday. This afternoon, the little orchestra I play in, we're doing a concert. We had a dress rehearsal yesterday. And so we started the dress rehearsal, and I'm playing the first trombone part, and I've got a visiting guy who's playing here, and bass trombone player, and a tuba, and trumpets over here and everything. And now we're doing some string. We got some numbers where only the strings. Got any fiddle players here this morning? The fiddle players, and so I look at the guy next to me. I said, I'm going to get up. I'm going to take a break because I'm not going to be playing for a while. So I get up and I look at my music. I think, I don't think I'm playing for a while. So I get up and I'm walking around the building and get myself a drink of water. I go wandering into the auditorium seating where the bass trombone player is sitting there, and I walk up next to him, and they're playing, and I look at him and I say, "Hey, how's it going?" He looks up at me and he goes, "Why aren't you playing?" And I said, "What?" And I look up, all the strings are playing, the trumpets are playing. I'm thinking, oh, they must have a part with just the trumpets playing along. I look, the guy that's visiting is playing a trombone part, and the tuba is playing, and I'm standing there, and I look down at my friend, and I go, "How come you're not playing?" He goes, "I don't have a part. You got a part." And so we looked at him. He said, "You blankety blank. If you meet me out in the parking lot, I'll tell you what he called me." He said, "Get up there and play." And so I worked my way up there and acted like nothing was amiss. And I'm thinking, I'm here to do one thing, and it's to play music, and I'm not paying attention. I need to wake up and stay focused on what I need to do. That's what these rules are doing with people that are saying, "God, we want to follow you now. Let's create special places where I can really focus on being with you. If I'm going to be in a relationship with you, I'm going to be constantly aware of people in my life, in my environment, in my world that are most vulnerable, the true slaves in this world. And wherever there is violence, my heart is going to be there to bring it to a place of peace." This is a calling that God is placing upon all of these people, and He does for you and me as well. So it's bad enough that sometimes I'm not awake when I'm supposed to be focusing on music, but I pray to God that as I try to be a child of God, I will be awake to Him. Heavenly Father, that is my prayer this morning, that spiritually you will help us to wake up. We will see things that we maybe never really saw before. We would recognize your hand at work in our life, in the lives of others, and the opportunities that you will place before us. Maybe we answer the call in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's close our service by singing 357. And I'll say goodbye to those that have joined us on Facebook. God bless you all. I hope to see you soon. Bye.